Hello everyone. My name is George Sexakis. I'm from Holistic, Greece. We're a small SME that works in climate and energy research and trying to make it more operational for different stakeholders. And today we have a very nice webinar for you as part of Diamond project called Demystifying Stakeholder Participation, Integrated Assessment Modeling and Scenarios. And in this context, we have three great speakers that are going to talk about this topic. Dr. Stephanie Bryers from ETH Zurich, Dr. Conor McGuckin from University of British Columbia, and Dr. Lucas Hermville from the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy. All three have great work on this topic, although they come from different communities, and that was also one of the purpose of this webinar, to bring together different communities. Stephanie comes mostly from the transdisciplinary research, so at least that's my interpretation. They will tell you more about it, of course, themselves. Conor is coming from participatory modeling communities, and Lucas is coming also from transdisciplinary research, but also from policy research as well. Before we start with the presentations, and you can see, I think you have the agenda already in the chat and the QA, I'll give the floor to Dr. Konstantinos Kouassidis from the National Technical University of Athens, who is the project manager of the Diamond project, which is the project that hosts this webinar, to tell us a bit more about Diamond and why we do this webinar today. Konstantinos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George, for the introduction, and of course, all scientists and stakeholders and interested parties that participate in this event. We already have a nice representation of people all around from all around the world and institutes. And as George said, I'm representing the Institute of Communication and Computer Systems at the National Technical University of Athens. We're coordinating these projects, and we're very excited about the activities that we are doing, and we hope that you find them also useful as well. So in Diamond, what we're trying to do is essentially we're trying to update and expand the capabilities of integrated assessment models. So we want to create the new generation of models to inform policymaking and the decision processes for climate change mitigation. And we try to up the game of integrated assessment modeling by linking these models with thematic modules across a wide variety of fields, from finance, from behavioral and psychology, so that we expand the capabilities of these modules and be able to answer more questions. But we also want to do this not in a silo way. We're trying to do this by engaging with stakeholders. So essentially, we're trying to co-develop models with stakeholders. We're also trying to co-create research questions that we're going to answer with our models. And of course, Stephanie will say more about the Diamond approach on this process. And what to me, as a non-expert in, let's say, necessarily an expert in stakeholder engagement and transdisciplinary research, is that there are a lot of terminology. So we have the transdisciplinary research, we have participatory frameworks, we have foresight workshops, we have all these terms, and sometimes it's not 100% clear what each methodology can contribute and what we can, and the findings that we can explicate from our stakeholders to inform our scientific processes. So we wanted to organize these workshops to lay out these different approaches to stakeholder engagement, to understand what has been done so far, see the insights that were gained in best practices from different projects, and of course create a space where we share these insights and findings, so that we can be influenced by these activities, and of course understand what everyone has contributed, so that we don't need to always go back to stakeholders. We can see what everyone has delivered so far, and of course have this nice community to exchange these ideas. So we're very happy about this workshop, and we hope that you also find it very useful as well. So thank you from my side, and George, back to you.
Thank you, Konstantinos. Very well said. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Stephanie Bryers for her presentation. just bear with us with the sharing of presentations. As you know, it's always the difficult issue in these webinars and meetings. Just stop sharing my slide. Definitely
All right,
free to share. Yeah.
Shall I begin to share mine? Let's hope it works.
Please, yes.
Is that something everyone can see?
Perfect, yes.
Perfect, all right. Thank you very much for having me today, and thank you for the introduction, Konstantinos. It is true, I'm going to be focusing on the Diamond project today, which I'm working on, and we are co-leading the transdisciplinary work package, or we so-called the co-design work package in Diamond. So talking about terminology, I have a quote that I will begin with, which is one of our participants in Diamond. When I said the term TD, which I understand as transdisciplinary, the participant said, you do mean top down, right, when you say TD. So indeed, terminology is very important, and that's exactly what I'm going to be focusing on in today's presentation. But firstly, the whole purpose of our transdisciplinary work package is exactly to address the kind of integrated assessment model sweet spot, as we can call it, which is this intersection between something that's policy relevant, societally relevant, accepted by society, but also technologically feasible. So integrated assessment models need to sort of overlap and sit in between all these different elements, and that is exactly why transdisciplinary research is so important, because we integrate different kinds of experts, whether they're policy relevant, whether they're societal experts, citizen representation, or modelers themselves. So the Diamond objective is, Konstantinos already sort of presented this, but we have these different objectives. On the one hand, we want to make models that are developed in an open, transparent, and participatory way. So the development and process of the model, the development process and the use of models is important for us. And on the other hand, what is represented in models, so in terms of things like spatial resolutions, but also policies, representing SDGs, these kinds of different elements we would like to improve in the models. And following a transdisciplinary approach, on the one hand, is helping our development of the models, and ensuring that we can make them sort of better, update them and upgrade them. But on the other hand, making sure that they're open, transparent, that the assumptions that they make are communicated, and that they are more legitimate, so increasing their uptake. And that is exactly, like I said, where the Diamond project comes in, addressing these criticisms. So that's our team that we work with, a very large team, and sort of the beginning half of the project and the transdisciplinary process focused really internally on a joint problem framing process to get to know the team, what people's goals are, what people's different understandings are, also, starting to understand what we mean by certain terminologies. So we focused the first half of our project on the internal team, and that's what I'm going to be focusing today's presentation on, is exactly the kind of perceptions of this internal team. So this is our co-design work package, where we do mutual understanding components, so jointly framing the project goals and requirements. We then do a knowledge co-production process with stakeholders, where we co-produce research questions with stakeholders. And then after those research questions have been produced, those research questions inform scenario development, scenario designs, and from then onwards, we ensure that that is integrated into actual policy and actual sort of legitimizing the kind of knowledge that we co-produced by validating all of our knowledge with stakeholders and ensuring that it integrates well into their policy and decision making. So this is one of our objectives. Exactly, these are the different Diamond objectives, and the one is developing a transdisciplinary approach to co-design models. So we're doing that on 3 different levels: externally, so producing results that are relevant and robust; internally, We want to strengthen the capacity of transdisciplinarity in Diamond. And at a meta level, we want to understand the different barriers and opportunities to collaboration in a large-scale consortia like Diamond itself. And here is the different kind of components to a transdisciplinary research project. So on the one hand, scientifically rigorous, but on the other hand, societally relevant. And the transdisciplinary process sits in between those two components, integrating aspects of both components. So the thing is that many people who want to practice transdisciplinarity are not so well acquainted with the different kinds of principles that frame and that guide transdisciplinary research. And that is exactly what I did as my meta research, let's say, of the first year of our transdisciplinary process in Diamond, is to understand what are transdisciplinary principles, how can we break them down in an easily graspable, accessible format for people like modelers who don't have the time to acquaint themselves with lots and lots of literature, but who are interested in understanding these principles. And then what I also did was looking at the Diamond process so far and identifying principles that actually need to be strengthened in the integrated assessment modeling process. So these are the principles and that I'll be talking briefly about today. So on the one hand, we have project principles, and these principles are things that are sort of the foundation of a project. One of them being altruistic. The project is sort of based on a wicked problem, and it's also highly context specific. Then we have process principles, which are the principles that guide a transdisciplinary process. So here we have things like systemically addressing the problem, involving scientific and non-scientific actors, or you can call these people stakeholders, a term that I'm not totally comfortable with, so I use actors instead. The process is also highly integrative, so blending and bridging different disciplines, different knowledge forms, also different perspectives. And then transdisciplinary processes are highly reflexive, so taking the time to individually and collectively reflecting on your perception, your positionality as an actor in the project. How can your perception be shifted and adapted to sort of blend with other people's perspectives, let's say. There's also a highly pluralistic process and nature to transdisciplinary research, which means that we try to capture different perspectives, different needs, different positions in a kind of productive, pluralistic format. So we don't try to achieve a single mindset, let's say, in a transdisciplinary research project, but rather that we try to put all these different perspectives into a single solution space and understanding people's different perspectives. Next up is that transdisciplinarity is often iterative, so it means going back, going forward, going sideways. Sometimes, as I very often experience in my workshops, I have to make changes to an entire workshop structure 5 minutes before the workshop begins, because suddenly there's another actor that's joining and we have to reframe the workshop approach to integrate this person. So iterations are really important. It doesn't mean that your research is not well structured. It just means that you're being agile. And then finally, for the process principle is creating a trust-building environment where people feel comfortable to express their needs. Often we have so many different kinds of experts and knowledge holders that you feel stupid, let's put it frankly, when someone refers to a specific word that you've never heard before in your life. And so in a trusting environment, we can openly say, look, I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you elaborate? And then the final kind of element of these principles is the outcome principle. So what are we actually trying to achieve with the transdisciplinary process? And here it's to increase the legitimacy and ownership of project outcomes. And ultimately, we want to transform a certain condition, right? We want to change the world for the better, to put it in a very altruistic way. So these are the transdisciplinary principles that I would say each person trying to take on a transdisciplinary approach should be acquainted with and should try and integrate into their work. So we have the grounding principles, we have the guiding principles, and we have the destination principles, if we can call them that. So I'll rush through this. In the Diamond project, I coded the different workshop data that we had and the different kinds of terminologies and codes that were used. I put them under the different principles, and you can start to see there are different principles that are giving a lot of attention. So scientific and non-scientific actors, people are really embodying that in the project, and they really acknowledge the importance of having loads of different actors in a project. But some other principles need some more attention. So I would say principles like reflexivity in integrated assessment modeling is lacking and is really important. What are the purpose of these models in the first place? What is our position in choosing our limitations and assumptions and what we represent, etc., in a model? And different things like understanding what integration means in a transdisciplinary sense versus integration in modeling. So, integrating knowledge and integrating different thought styles and perspectives versus an integrated assessment model, which largely focuses on integrating different data sets. So this kind of language needs clarification. And these principles are the ones that I would say require some more strengthening in transdisciplinary research, specifically in modeling. And the final one is the systemic principle, which if you look at this wheel, it doesn't even feature on the wheel. And that's because I found that modelers are lacking a little bit looking at the systemic problem that they're trying to address with their models. It's very much a solution space, which is great. It is also important to look at solutions, but firstly, addressing why we're in the first place doing modeling, what is the ultimate goal of this research, is something that I think modelers should definitely focus on when doing a transdisciplinary process. And so this is my final little comment, and that is assessing a team and addressing the blind spots in transdisciplinary research can really aid in addressing the roles, the developments, and the processes that we use in integrated assessment modeling, and it can help teams to co-design integrated assessment models for better climate action. So really understanding what transdisciplinary research is and acquainting yourself with this can certainly help guide a better and more co-productive modeling process. So I will end over there. Thank you very much. So the work package is co-led by my group lead, Dr. Bianca Vieni-Battista. So I'd also like to thank her in this presentation. And those are my contact details if you'd like to know more.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Great presentation, and I think it starts the very nice, it's a very nice entry point to our topic today, which I think, yeah, Connor, you can continue from this. We're gonna have questions towards the end of the meeting, so we thought it would be better, so we can address everything together. But of course, we can also, if anyone has a question for Stephanie now, you can add it in the Q&A or also I think in the chat. So Connor, yeah, we can see your slides, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, George, and thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, I think that's a very nice context or kind of foundation before I get into how we apply some of these principles then to a modeling process. So I'm going to share some insights from a paper I led, which was a kind of a participatory process to talk about different approaches for participatory energy system modeling. To firstly, I'm not moving slides, just outline how the paper comes about and where the presentation is coming from. I hosted 2 workshops where we looked at what are the different stages you can involve stakeholders in energy system modeling and what are good practice principles you should be following when you're doing this. And then secondly, what are the key research gaps and where are the opportunities or areas for improvement? And another piece just on the paper I want to highlight here quickly is that in the appendix, we have an outline of case studies from different participatory energy system modeling examples at small community scale, but also national and multi-country models and across different on energy system scales as well, full system or specific power sector models. This is energy system model focused, but I think most of the lessons and the stakeholder engagement approaches would be very transferable to IEM tools. The main piece I want to focus on in the presentation is this framework that we developed for the different steps in the energy system modeling process and how you might involve stakeholders. So it comes from experiences of 15 researchers that have done different forms of stakeholder engagement through their modeling process, and also just looking at kind of best practice or good practice as we settled on like the transfer principles that Stephanie outlined and what would an ideal modeling process look like. But I'm conscious that it's not always going to be perfectly, situation, and you're not always going to be able to replicate this. So firstly, we have this research coordination and delivery. Who's involved in the kind of the research planning and setting up the goals or the objective of the modeling exercise? Is it just a research team and then later they involve stakeholders, or are you doing it kind of collaboratively from the start to the end? So this might look like a steering group meeting that you have on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis where you kind of review the research directions with outside partners and try to then, like collaboratively maybe do some of your engagement approaches or your external participants. Next up, then we have the research design. So recognizing that overarching body is quite difficult to get a commitment from partners to be involved for like a 2-3 year maybe steering group, but you could just have a one-off engagement as well, where you try to sit down with people and get into co-defining user needs or modeling priorities. What are the questions like policymakers have? Often modelers say like, why don't policymakers listen to us? But maybe, you didn't sit down with them before you did your modeling exercises and figure out what questions to actually have. So you're going in totally different directions. And then, just co-defining some of those areas for research. Next up is the modeling assumptions. This is where you see like most examples in existing kind of literature on participatory energy system modeling, asking people opinions on different technologies or different energy scenarios or their kind of aspirations for the future. And then how do we shape this into scenarios or different storylines for the models to represent? And then next up is modeling results. So actually going back to people and discussing how their input has been shaped in the model or how these assumptions and have been taken and put into different quantitative scenarios. But this is a much less explored area than the model inputs, which I think is a real shame because it leaves a lot of control in the modeler's hands and the research team to decide how we interpret what stakeholders have told us about their preferences for technologies or what can fit within the model and what can't. And then we have outreach and communications. So how are you doing? How are you sharing your insights from the models? What are your different communication materials? Trying to get beyond academic papers and traditional kind of scientific methods of dissemination, developing like policy briefs or more visual outputs, dashboards, and then things like open model repositories on GitHub or online platforms to engage with the results and scenarios. And finally, evaluation, which I think Stephanie had pointed out, the reflexivity is rarely a thing that we're very good at coming from kind of technical disciplines like energy system modeling, economics. But we need to evaluate the whole process and the various different parts within it. If we bring people in, how's their experience of the engagement? What have we learned as modelers? How has it changed our perception of models, of what they can say, what they can't say? And what's the impact of the process? What are the outcomes? Did we achieve what we said we wanted to achieve in terms of outcomes? But this is generally a neglected area, and it is tricky because you keep going back to the same people and asking them for their time to do things. But I think it's really important for us to gather learnings and try to improve our approaches. And finally, then, just before I move on from the framework, to highlight what I've outlined here is like a perfectly linear process from start to finish. But in reality, it's much more iterative and messy, and you're kind of going back and forth. And you should be hopefully feeding, your initial results back into new assumptions and then adjusting as you go. I want to outline then 5 good practice principles that we settled on for the participatory energy system modeling. First up is stakeholder mapping. So of course, the whole point of participatory energy system modeling is to try to bring in more diverse perspectives and increase representation across different actor groups. I might need to change that there, maybe to actor mapping rather than stakeholder mapping. I know people don't like stakeholder anymore, but that's a tangent. There's this tension here, I suppose, between trying to improve representation but not wasting people's time. We need to acknowledge that stakeholders' time is a limited resource. So to be very clear why you're involving people, if it actually is useful to them, using different stakeholders at different stages of the process. Maybe you design it with key partners, and then in your assumptions bit, you're trying to go to like more general public or outside expert groups. And then this flexible adaptive approach, which again, I think Stephanie touched on in her principles, are we actually open to changing our research plan or throwing it out entirely maybe? And this is very difficult for modelers, which might have a very set objective like net zero scenarios for 2050, a lot of legacy built into the tools that they use that have been developed over potentially decades. And then acknowledging model limitations, just being really critical of what doesn't go into the model and how certain narratives or voices can be shut out by the fact that they can't go into models, and figuring out how we can communicate that effectively with the people that we're bringing in and asking their opinions so that they're not disappointed that their voice has kind of been excluded then through the later modeling process. And then tied quite closely to this is this idea of being respectful of divergent views. So if something does, there's this maybe this idea that participatory energy system modeling can help to address gaps in our understanding, but it might actually create more problems and highlight wider gaps. And then there's also this issue of if something doesn't fit neatly into the model and is totally divergent. So we need to find ways to deal with these different perspectives and maybe narratives that don't quite match up with our conventional quantitative ways to represent them in models. And then finally, just to be very critical and reflexive about the process, your own bias, and how much control you have as a researcher and a modeler over the final outcomes. I'll close down with 6 research gaps that we had. So first up is this question of, are we involving a diverse range of stakeholders? And particularly from reviewing participatory energy system modeling examples, I know that the vast majority of studies don't get beyond the kind of usual suspects. So they only engage with policymakers, researchers from the social sciences, or like energy industry experts, people that work in electricity planning or stuff like that. So we're not really getting beyond the kind of people that already are very familiar with the energy system and what the transition is, and getting that wider perspective on what a desirable future is. Next up then we have the choice of model, and this is a real kind of difficult one, but if we're trying to be true to that flexible adaptive approach and adjusting to what the questions that our actors are bringing to us, we need to be open perhaps to changing the modeling tool. But as I said, there's a lot of legacy in why we're using certain modeling tools, or maybe it's already agreed at funding process. So I think early engagement here and just being clear about what you've already set as your modeling scope from the get-go is important. And then unpacking the assumptions and results. And this one here, there's a tension here with the stakeholder time, and also that trying to get beyond the usual suspects. So we need people that understand what's kind of going on inside the models and why it says certain things. But also you need to be quite, knowledgeable about energy system workings to get into that discussion. So there's a real challenge here, I think, for modelers to be good at communicating how little levers that we pull in the models affect the outcomes. And this is quite tied to the next one, again, communicating complexity and uncertainty. There's a tension here between this desire from policymakers for like a single, what should we do? Give us the one-liner, 30-second pitch, and trying to explain, we have no idea really, this is the future we're talking about. So there's a massive amount of uncertainty baked into which technologies would be, viable in the future and how they're going to develop at different rates. And then this point I raised already about what's missing from the models, so the need for interdisciplinary approaches if we're going to do participatory modeling. So we have social science, methods to bring the qualitative along with the quantitative, and we don't lose some of those more divergent views or alternative kind of futures like degrowth and stuff don't just get thrown out because we're using GDP as our main driver for projections in our model. And then, finally, this reiterating the point about the need for evaluation. What are the outcomes of the process? How is the bringing in stakeholders maybe change the modeling results versus not bringing in stakeholders? How do different user or actor perspectives look in different scenarios? And what is their experience throughout? And that's it for me. I'll leave you with a lovely picture of the British Columbian sunset.
Thank you so much, Connor. And I really like that the progression of things. So like in a way that it was connected also with Stephanie's presentation. And many questions. And I also have like a question from myself, like whether things changed from the time we wrote the paper and we thought of these gaps. But we can keep it for the discussion. But now let's hear from Lucas, Dr. Lucas Hermville, on his own presentation, then we can move on to the discussion.
Yeah,
Lucas,
can you see the slides, right?
We can see it, yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this opportunity. It gave me a nice chance to delve in fond memories of the research projects that I coordinated in the last few years. And I will share a few insights from 3 projects which we engage with stakeholders, and a few lessons, insights from these. So the first project was called Central and Carbon Intensive Regions in Transition. It was really focused on structural change in coal regions across Europe. And during the proposal preparation stage, we partnered with a group called ICLE. It's a kind of a network of municipalities and cities across Europe, and they were in charge of leading this stakeholder engagement part. And they came up with this idea of capacity building transition academies, where we will meet with kind of regional just transition professionals, I would say, from government, but also NGOs from coal regions. And when they proposed this, I was not completely sold. I was coordinating the bid, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. It won't harm, but it's not my favorite part of the thing. But it really turned into something super interesting, and I guess one of the strong points of the entire project. And I will tell you why. So this was really the idea of the project. We had a theoretical work package, then empirical work, both qualitative social science and quantitative modeling work. We work with Ethereum modeling in this project. And we had this work package 5 on transferability, capacity building, and exploitation. So the idea was really that we can kind of triangulate our results here. And this is, I think, also something that resonates with the previous discussions. Triangulation is often seen as, okay, we just confirm that our results are correct. This is a very narrow word idea of triangulation. You can also kind of triangulate for complementarity to see kind of two sides of the same coin. But you can also kind of triangulate for divergence and see where kind of there are differences in the knowledge that are there that cannot be combined. And for me as a policy researcher, these are the most interesting ones, because they point us to the tensions that are also often the political, particularly interesting and contested issues. So this is also super helpful. And it's I know that a lot of modelers have kind of the tendency to try to streamline everything and integrate it in a sense. But I really live from this divergence of views. So I think that's the most interesting part. What was super interesting is that we organized these 2-day events and brought in people from across Europe. And the way that ICLE organized this was that they asked the participants to bring their own problems and discuss with the other stakeholders and get some kind of peer consultation from the others. So it was not at all that the stakeholders answered our research questions or responded to our questions. They were responding to each other and discussing their problems, and we were merely listening, throwing in a little bit of wisdom from the research we had already done, and but really learning in that process. And that was super insightful. It helped us to reframe some of the outputs that we had. It helped us to fine-tune our research questions, and basically was also in the end kind of data and input that ended up that was not even planned. But that was kind of a way that this really worked out quite well by just changing the perspective and not asking the stakeholders to help us solve our problems as researchers, but communicate about their own. And we will see loose ends where we can support their questions and their challenges. So that is also a kind of my first lesson here. Don't ask stakeholders to answer your questions. It's not a direct input to your model. It's not another data set to integrate in an integrated assessment model, like Stephanie, you said, or pointed out, right? No, I'm not saying that you said that, but I think there's a tendency to see that and interpret it that way. But it's really about finding out what the problems and the challenges of the stakeholders are, and see how we as a research community can support them and help them and respond to them, which makes our research automatically more impactful. And at least for me, these events were super, like, they gave me a boost of motivation to continue my research, because I know why I would do it. The other project is called NDC Aspects. This is kind of a project that assessed sectoral perspective for sectors to support NDC development and the global stocktake, with a lot of modeling involved, but also quite interdisciplinary work. So we had work streams on energy intensive industries, transport, building sector, and the agricultural AFOLU sector. But in the project structure itself, we had kind of disciplinary work packages, as you can see here. And then we had these sectoral conversations method or innovation in a sense, which was kind of had this integration aspect across the disciplines, but also brought in external stakeholders and were really kind of the hub that brought the entire project together. And we had basically parallel sectoral conversations for all the 4 streams of work that were otherwise not really connected. Just an overview of what we did. So obviously we started to plan this to be completely parallel and the same smooth process going through all 4 topics, and we ended up doing completely different things because we had different styles of leaders, we had different stakeholders that we involved, we responded to outside policy developments, and we needed the flexibility to adapt the process according to the needs of the stakeholders and the topics. What we also did in this project, in response to Connor's point about evaluation, unfortunately, we're not able to evaluate with the external stakeholders, but at least we evaluated with the 40 or so researchers in our project about what we learned, what we had from this process of integration. And this is kind of where we came up with that well, a few people also saw that this stakeholder activities and sectoral conversation did not really respond or bring any new significant contribution. But the others really also found that it helped us to adjust central assumptions for research, adjusting the conceptual framework and theoretical tools that we used for our work, to adjust the interpretation of results. Connor, that's also what you mentioned. And it helped us to revise the framing and or storyline in which we presented the results and fed them into the policy research. So overall, it was quite a positive evaluation. I'm just realizing that I did not put the number of people responding in here, but it's in the paper that's linked here, which is a really detailed reflection, evaluation of this sectoral conversations process that we had in the project. So what were the insights from this? So first of all, that sectoral conversations, specifically about this kind of transdisciplinary stakeholder work, is resource intensive. It's something that is easily disregarded, especially if you don't know how much time and effort goes into coordinating that, recruiting the people, talking to them. It is impossible to predict. Stephanie, you put this also out, so it's really hard to plan as well. You need to exploit the flexibilities that you have in your work program and maybe build some in from the outset, because you will have to adapt. You will have to take into account emerging developments outside, and that's fine, and that's how it is supposed to be. That's the whole point, to be able to listen to those outside world changes and try to align your research with these developments, especially if you're working in environments that are highly dynamic political environments, like climate and energy is basically all of the time. Same point that Stephanie was making, trust is super important. And that also takes a lot of time. That's why we need so many resources to build that trust. And it takes a special kind of leadership to be able to bring together the people, to help the group to find specific focus for the discussions. You have to narrow down. You can't discuss, I don't know, a very broad set industry transformation. You have to boil down and find specific topics where people can actually get to the substance of it. And that obviously will exclude someone. It will favor others. But this is a process that is necessary. But it also can seem to be kind of unproductive work by people who are not used to it. So there is some frustration involved sometimes. Also by the leaders, because I think that a lot of this work is not really, it's like care work at home. It's not really, it's super important, but it's not really recognized. And it's also hard to get published. So on the one hand, you need really strong leaders that are bringing together a lot of competences in this. On the other hand, it's really not valued, or not valued is not the wrong term, but there is no status that comes with that. I think that's the point that I was making already. So that you need the leadership, and it's kind of unloved work that is under-recognized, and that should change. The last project is one that's still ongoing, where a lot of people here are still involved, which focuses on building a new modeling suite for industry transformation in the EU. And what we do here is we have kind of regional stakeholder workshops, again, coming from the realization that a lot of industries are clustered, and regional effects are super important, both for competitiveness, for energy consumption, for socioeconomic impacts. But very often models cannot actually represent that well. So we started there. We had stakeholder workshops in those regions where we use this Three Horizons framework, which I think again is a method to have a basis for discussion among a group of people, but it's also very open for divergent views. So it's not a tool that forces people into consensus. It gives space for people to have different views, and that's fine, and that's part of the method, I think. And that's still an ongoing process. We have completed the first round of workshops, and we're now at that stage where we need to kind of, we distill a set of research questions from these insights, but now it's a matter of translating those insights into something that's actually workable for modelers. Because the questions that the stakeholders are usually very large and very big and very unspecific, and the models have to find ways to nail them down, to quantify those questions, or to bring them to a set of indicators that are representable. And it's also, again, there is kind of an attempt often, that's my experience working with modelers, to answer a question. But in my point of view, it's mostly about thinking ways how you can contribute with some aspects to the wider discussion, to the wider political debate that's happening under the big question. So no need to answer the full question, but find ways to contribute to a conversation. And that is already quite useful, because it makes, again, I guess the results of the project much more tangible and more impactful ultimately. So that's my 5 insights from 3 research projects.